We are live at the 5th Annual MSS Denver Forum, and we are very pleased to have a panel moderated by Dr. Milton Mattox, Chief Technology Officer at Castle Shield. We're going to be talking quantum encryption and the MSSP of the future. On our panel, what an illustrious crowd. We have Dr. Bertrand, Cambou, Professor Nanotechnology and Cybersecurity, Northern Arizona University, and Visiting Scholar at Brown. Michael Osborne, CTO, IBM Quantum Safe, IBM Research. Katalin, Bártfai-Walcott, Senior Principal Engineer, Emerging Growth Incubation at Intel Corporation, and CTO, Ambient Science at DGC. And Gregg, President, Gregg Global Group, Director of Global Markets at Cleverdome. I'm going to leave you in Dr. Milton's capable hands, but may I say, what an illustrious panel. Very, very much looking forward to it.
All right, thank you so much. I want to say hello to everyone, and we're going to jump right in. We have about 40 minutes to cover this topic. The way we've set this up is that this is going to be like a conversation amongst colleagues, and you all get a chance to listen in on the conversation. Specifically, we're looking at keeping data safe in the quantum computer era. And what does that actually mean? So we have about 4 high-level type questions that we're going to ask each member of the panel. Each member will have about 5 to 7 minutes to respond to the question. And then when we get completed with all of the questions, we will have sort of like an open question session at the end, time allowing, of course. But the goal is to understand what can we do and what can be done. What can companies do? What can MSPs, MSSPs do to help keep data safe? And when would they need to do this? Since, Phelim did a great job introducing people, I think what we'll do is jump right into the questions. Again, each panelist will get 5 to 7 minutes to respond to the questions, and then we'll go that way until we get to the end. So the first person up is going to be Dr. Bertrand Cambou, and the question that we're going to start off with, and Bertrand, we're looking forward to this question and working with you on this, if you will. So the first question is, why will certain asymmetric encryption key exchange encryption algorithms, why will they be vulnerable in the quantum computer era? These are certain asymmetric algorithms. Why will they be vulnerable? And with that, I'll turn it over to you, Bertrand.
Thank you, Milton, for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here. Asymmetrical cryptography is a very important technology. Every time you use your credit card to, let us say, a point of sales terminal, the validations is asymmetrical cryptography. Every time you sign a cryptocurrency, every time you sign an email, every time you use your phone and the SIM card, this is all asymmetrical cryptography. This is the backbone of the information age. In the 90s, a professor from MIT, his name is Dr. Peter Shaw, essentially has been going after one of the most important algorithms called RSA. And RSA is essentially based on the factorizations of 2 prime numbers. And what Dr. Shaw did, he essentially did use number theory to transform that. And then he used an algorithm that's called a quantum Fourier transform and demonstrate that the day quantum computers are going to have more than a certain size, the RSA technology is going to be break in a few seconds, which is essentially a big issue because this RSA is everywhere. A few years later, you had the same methods as being used to destroy another algorithm that is called elliptic curve cryptography, which in between the two, you essentially have the backbone. Now, those two are based on very elegant mathematics and essentially making them vulnerable. Now, in the 80s, you had a couple of other asymmetrical methods that has been that has been proposed. One of them was from Caltech with the so-called classic McNeely's code. And then you had the so-called hash-based cryptography. They're all from the same time, but because the key and the protocol was a bit too long, nobody used it in a general, which means that our entire society has been based on that. And then again, the credit to Dr. Shaw. We are studying that, we're implementing that, and we are all confirming that this is the case, which means that's Milton, the very short answer to your questions about the vulnerability of asymmetrical cryptography, at least the two based on RSA and elliptic curve.
Sure. And thank you for that, Bertrand. Do you believe that given what's being done by the National Institute of Standards and Technology as it relates to post-quantum cryptography, or PQC, and as Phelan said, that's all a mouthful, but do you believe that with the progress that NIST has been making over the last, say, 2 to 3, 4 years, should companies maybe take a look at some of these technologies or some of these algorithms?
The interesting point is that there is a new type of math that has been under study for the next, again, more than 10 years by NIST and NSA. It's called lattice technology. And those one are very, very promising. They have been actually passing all type of testing, which is extremely encouraging, and they are fast. They're really, really fast. Now, interesting enough, Milton, is the two old technology that has been put on the side are not dead either, because what was supposed to be very long, and there is the classic Michaelis and the so-called Sphinx are actually still on the things, because the technology has been moving so much that they may be fast enough, which means that I think that we are to a point right now that there are better technologies, safer, ready to use, and this is very exciting time.
Thank you so much, and I agree with you completely. Just a quick follow-up on that. At Castle Shield, we are actually implementing a couple of those algorithms that NIST has approved for standardization. We're doing crystals Kyber and crystals dilithium, and we found that they are extremely fast, and it's imperceptible to the user that we are using these versus the current encryption algorithms that are generally used, elliptic curve, Diffie-Hellman, or RSA. But I agree with your comments completely. So thank you.
Your choice is actually wise, because we also did our independent testing, and we find out that you can actually use existing asset, existing computing power that you have on your phone, on your credit card, everywhere. Actually, they need less computing than the RSA on elliptic curve, which means that you have the dilithium, and I think the way I tested it, the dilithium is an order of magnitude faster than elliptic curve, which is an order of magnitude faster than RSA. So this is a good selections, Milton, that your customer should benefit.
I would agree. I would agree. And thank you again. And with that, we'll move to our next question. This one is for Kati. Let's look at things a little differently, Kati. Let's talk about privacy and what it means, and what are we talking about when we get into data privacy. So so the question is, I'm going to say the formal question is companies' data and information truly private? And as a follow-up to that, Kati, if you don't mind, is it possible to achieve true data privacy within the architectural constraints of information technology and security? I know it's a bit much, but if you can just handle those two perspectives, that would be fantastic.
Sure, absolutely. And thank you very much for having me on this panel. The the interesting, your question is actually very timely, especially listening to the previous presenter, Mike Goodacre. Hopefully I'm not butchering his name, but he really started touching on the concepts of privacy and the concepts of data use and the limitations in privacy that we are dealing with as individuals who are on cyberspace. And my perspective is that we really don't have the ability to achieve true privacy because we are not aware of where our data goes. And I think there are multiple aspects of that. Much of that Mike is actively looking at and discussing and describing in his presentation and the work that he's doing. And I wholeheartedly agree with everything that he's saying. I think there's a perspective is that we are not actually present in cyberspace. We are a user of cyberspace, and there's a lot of work and a lot of conversation that's happening in cyberspace that is happening at the speed of light in a language of the digital language that we are not part of. So when we are looking at data management, data privacy, and what we are actually aware of, we are only aware of a tiny, tiny little fraction of content that we are actually creating. So, and we believe that those things are private. And frankly, they are not, because the contracts and the management of that data that as we are engaging with our iPhones and we sign that contract of adhesion that Apple, for example, describes on how we are allowed to use that device is actually limiting our ability to trace and track and to manage the data that's being created, beyond the fact that we are not even aware of what's happening and what data is collected and where it's going. So is it possible to achieve true data privacy even from a layman's perspective? I don't believe so. But I think that there are a lot of technologies that are looking to enable privacy. And those technologies that are going through minimizing or eliminating personal identifiable information, or scraping or filtering the data that's going on cyberspace, are attempting to create privacy and attempting to provide you with the mechanisms to understand what that privacy is. But I think the critical point that maybe we need to think through as industry and technologists is what happens when data gets created? Because when data gets created, the data that's being collected, the data that's got created, the data that's being stored is information that includes everything, even the information that's private. So at one point, before the privacy algorithms, the anonymization and filtering algorithms are applied to that data, somebody somewhere has everything. So we apply the privacy mechanisms afterwards. So there's a form of the data that's private or potentially private, but there is no proof that the original information is also not available and who has access to that. So I would question that in the mechanism of today, when we are looking at data components and data management, can we actually be truly private? Now, looking at the second part of your question, which is information technology considerations to explore true data privacy, there are three things I would like to talk about. The first one is today's technologies, and Bertrand and the other panel members and you have talked about some of the things that we're relying on, traditional security and privacy mechanisms. And we have to look at them throughout the life cycle of data, which includes creation, collection, storage, transport, and even computational access. So, and I think Bertrand talked about the different encryption mechanisms, public key encryption mechanisms like AES, RSA, ECC, and others. And I think these standards provide the best of breed. I don't think they are ready for quantum encryption. So I think some of or quantum decryption. And I think the work at NIST focusing on encryption and digital signatures is starting to touch on one of those elements. So the conversation that you had about crystal Kyber and crystal dilithium and even Sphinx for digital signatures are really looking at the functionalities that need to be there to handle these existing security functionalities in the quantum age. So I wholly agree with and applaud the incredible work and call to action in 2016 by NIST. But I think when we are looking at the future considerations around data, we actually have to look at what is it that we are trying to secure and why. And we are looking at confidentiality. So how do we manage authorized access? We apply the principles of least privilege, encryption, 2FA, strong password, configuration management, monitoring, and alerting. Now, if I reverse that conversation and I make the statement, maybe a bold statement, that we actually have to create management, monitoring, and alerting, maybe in the form of a contract and a transaction, as a digital entity in cyberspace. So when I become an entity that is equivalent to all of the other digital entities in cyberspace, and we are negotiating a contract, maybe we can get in front of data creation with the concepts of privacy. So now if I create a transactional contract that says, I have certain data sets that are private, and negotiate with the data collector that say, by the way, I as an individual or I as a digital entity do not authorize you to collect that data. It actually changes the notion of privacy, because that initial data set that included anything and everything that we then privatized, I can get in front of that with a contract and an agreement that negotiates with a data collector to say, you're actually not authorized to collect that. So that initial data set that included everything actually doesn't exist. So the notion of privacy then changes. So I think we can change the concepts around confidentiality and integrity and availability, which are the mechanisms or the reasons why we are encrypting and we are signing and we are trying to create the notions of security. I think that we can change the concept of privacy if we create the mechanisms of contracts and negotiations that help us establish a more equitable space for data collection and get in front of that aspect from the beginning. So this is some of the research and some of the work that I'm doing both at Intel and outside of Intel, and hopefully we can get additional brilliant minds to start thinking about these aspects in the future. So hopefully that answered your questions and maybe put some thought in the mind of the audience and other panelists of consideration. Thank you.
You absolutely answered the question, and I do want to do one very quick follow-up to what you're stating. It's a follow-up question. As I was listening to you at the end, right, you're negotiating this access from the, say, for data collectors. That sounded a bit like this term that we hear batted around from time to time, and that is zero trust and zero trust frameworks. Would you categorize what you're stating at the end as a zero trust framework, or were you talking about something slightly different?
So I think the zero trust environment and zero trust framework is taking advantage of, and it's building on the existing information technology elements that are enabling security. What I am putting forth, what I'm proposing, and the notion that I'm bringing forward is actually building a new digital data service environment that actually enables different digital entities to enter digital space prior to data creation. So prior to the purpose of them being there, for the purpose of enabling the environment that will be there when the negotiation needs to happen. So this is actually a technology area that I think warrants development and thinking and serious evolution that is taking the existing notions and actually kind of modifying that, and maybe even changing the underpinnings of context of data in information technology and changing that notion of what that is and what that means, and putting it more in a transactionally managed contractual conversation. So hopefully that also answered your question. Thank you very much.
You definitely answered. Thank you so much. And I agree with what you're stating. I love the way you framed it. And let's continue that conversation, because there's a lot of important work that needs to be done here. So let's definitely continue that conversation.
Thank you.
And with that said, we're going to move to Michael Osborne from IBM. And the question that we get asked a lot, it's like, when is quantum computing going to be available? When is it going to be sufficiently fast in a general purpose frame of reference? And so I'd like to, with that as a backdrop, the question I would like to ask you, Michael, is when is quantum computing estimated to be sufficiently fast enough to make the certain current asymmetric encryptions vulnerable? What time frame are we looking at in your estimate?
So there are two answers to that question. So one easy one and one difficult one. The easy answer is when is too soon. Just based on experience, it's been very difficult to migrate to a new form of cryptography, even when we know the other one's broken. So that's the easy answer. The difficult answer is we're not quite sure, because the innovation is in steps and bounds. It's not a linear function. So we can estimate, but the problem with answering this question is that it's going to frame a problem in the future. And actually the problem is now, it's the impact which is in the future. So the longer one leaves, let's say, this transition to quantum safe mechanisms, the larger the impact is going to be. The more that we continue to roll out non-quantum safe cryptography, the larger the impact is going to be. So I know it's very tricky that essentially CISOs and people worried about security always have priorities. Their priorities are what's happening today, ransomware, things like this. So it's very easy to say, oh, that estimate says 5 years, that estimate says 10 years. That's going to be my follower that's going to need to worry about this. I don't need to worry about it so much. So framing, let's say, the problem in the future is dangerous. So I think that's the first thing that needs to be really clear. So to get some technical, let's say, aspect of the response, given that up until we make things quantum safe, everything is lost in the quantum safe era. So given that, when is that era likely to appear? Well, there are a number of, let's say, developments you need to look at. So one of them is the quantum machinery. So how fast does it scale? The other one is algorithm efficiency. So how do you take an algorithm like Peter Shor's and map it efficiently such that a quantum machine can run it? And if I give you the example that 10 years ago, it was estimated to break RSA, you needed around 1,000 million physical qubits. So that is a monster of a machine, which is not likely to appear for many decades. But if I was to tell you 20 years ago, the estimates are revised down to around 20 million qubits. That's orders of magnitude improvements in how you take a problem and map it into something executable on a quantum computer. If you look in 2021, there was a paper which, given a certain form of hybrid memory, you would need 13,000 qubits. There was a lot of excitement this year where a paper from China suggesting actually if you use a different algorithm, not Shor's, but Schnorr's, you could do this in 372 qubits. So the message here is that you need to also look at the efficiency of how problems are mapped into the quantum domain space. And why are there so many advancements? Because it's a hell of a topic. There are so many people running experiments on quantum computers. We have over 100,000 users on our cloud systems playing with the technology. With a lot of clever people, you're going to get advances in things like efficiency. But now look on the other side. The other side of the coin is the scaling of the quantum machinery. If you'd have asked me this question 5 years ago, I would have said, no, not in my lifetime, in terms of how fast this is going to scale. But I see the colleagues, and I see that, end of last year, we announced We released the Osprey processor, which has 433 qubits. Okay, so it's difficult to talk about qubits because it's not the only dimension which matters when it comes to the how well you can execute algorithms on a machine. But so around 433 qubits now. This year, the plan is 1,121 qubits. So quite significant increases actually in terms of the number of qubits. This is on what we call a single processor system. Okay, so actually what we see is that's about where we're headed, where we're going to stop when it comes to single processor technology. And in parallel now we look at what we call multi-processor technology. So multiple processors on a single chip. This is standard semiconductor scaling at the end of the day. You need special interconnects and things like this. But and there, for example, in 2024, we will release something called the Flamingo, which is a multi-processor chip that has 1,300 and something. I can't remember exactly. 1,386. But already then this is essentially what our road to scaling. And then in 2025, it's going to be around 4,100. And then just with, I would say more standard, not standard, but the sort of scaling technologies that you would see in a in semiconductors generally. So with a roadmap up to around, I would say, 1 million qubits. Now, it's not linear. We have a linear roadmap, but that doesn't predicate or doesn't, if there are sudden enhancements into the sort of memory that comes to the table, et cetera, you might have jumps, you might have setbacks. So it's a kind of a roadmap. We've met that roadmap every year so far that we've had. But it's becoming all very tangible in terms of the progress, much more than had you asked me 5 years ago, for example. So that's an answer which then covers the technical progress on quantum machinery and the efficiency of mapping these algorithms.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Michael. I've been watching all of the roadmaps, but particularly the IBM roadmaps from, Eagle, the Osprey, the upcoming Condor. And it's just amazing to see that. And as you stated, when you get into the multi-processing aspect of that, multi-cores or multi-chips environments, I think it's going to get really interesting. But I do want to just do one very quick follow-up with you, if you don't mind. And that is, so it could be, a few years in our, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, 10 years away. What about, should companies think about maybe moving faster to some of these new algorithms that are out because of the shelf life of the data that's out there, right? So a nefarious individual may harvest this data, keep it there, and then when these computers are sufficiently fast enough, then they just go and breach the data and then harvest that data. Should that be a concern?
That certainly should. Okay, so what we have learned, so we're in the process of migrating really thousands of applications to become quantum safe, and there's very simple learning. Okay, depending on your starting point, that's more or less difficult. So if you have, I would say, a very old-fashioned COBOL program on a very old-fashioned platform, that transition is going to be incredibly complicated. If you actually have migrated and modernized applications, so you're running a service mesh on a containerized platform, you can automate that transition. So it can be done like just by changing configuration. What does that mean? It means that there's a lot of things you can do to make the transition simpler by things such as having a good CI/CD pipeline, by modernizing onto more development, to more, I would say, Kubernetes or OpenShift type platforms, things like observability. So having the right sensors and monitoring and things in place to easily identify where crypto is, to have, so I would say there's so many things that you can be doing to make that transition simpler. And the key is just awareness. If you're aware that you need to transition to crypto, you can build it into all of these strategies, these kind of like improvement strategies that you should be doing anyway. Zero trust is another one we heard. All of these things, sprinkle it with a bit of quantum safe or post-quantum awareness, and your life will be much, much simpler when it comes to when the standards are final, so in a couple of years' time.
Thank you again. Thank you so much. Again, it's a great conversation from all the panelists so far. And with that, we're going to go to Ryan and, just, help us take this thing home and bring it to, what does it really mean to our audience here? So your question, Ryan, what can companies, MSPs, MSSPs, what can they do today to start preparing for the burgeoning quantum computing era?
Well, I think the first thing, to take a look at, and thank you, Dr. Milton, for having me on today. I appreciate it very much. I think the first thing we look at, we know that the National Institute of Standards and Technology should be coming out with their standardization of post-quantum era, standards within the next year. At least it's positioned for 2024, right? Secondarily, after that, they're supposed to start developing kind of processes and recommendations to start preparing for the post-quantum era, and how to make those transitions and certain guidelines for companies to prepare for that. From the MSP and MSSP side, besides their own internal operations and being aware of that and preparing themselves, they have the responsibility to help their clients through this process. And I think part of that comes in a few different steps. One of those is building the awareness of the quantum security risks that we do face and are coming in the future, and gaining, consensus by engaging C-suites. We deal with this a lot in privacy and some of the areas that I deal with as well. Getting the board and the C-suite on board, understanding what the risks are and how to prepare for that future. And that includes the operational organization as well. And I think, the second part, you have to take kind of a fresh approach to looking at the way that you're going to make those transitions, right? And kind of like agile, like we've done with agile software, we kind of have an agile point where we deal with what we can here, find out what our most critical systems. The other part, like we talked about, even it's relative to privacy, is knowing what encryption you have and where that data is encrypted and what types of encryption that you're using, where the vulnerabilities will be, and advising the clients on that situation so that they're aware of what they have, what needs to be done, and then discussing where the enterprise's readiness is at that point, where they can plan to make those changes and what kind of time frame to implement post-quantum technologies and encryptions, et cetera, where needed. I think one of the last things in my notes, when we were talking about the different things that you have to look at internally, we were talking about data and cryptographic assets, right? We talked about that just a second ago. You understand the keys that are being used at that time, assess those. And also, importantly, I think it's important that the MSP or MSSP takes a look at their infrastructure limitations. Basically, what are they going to need faster processing, et cetera? What are their infrastructure limitations that need to be addressed to plan for those proportionately as well? And kind of what we all do on a regular basis. All of us here, I know that we've met at a conference in the past and such like that, but being involved in this ecosystem, I spend a lot of time at conferences, not only speaking, but they are one of my best opportunities to learn from such accomplished individuals that are able to teach me as well as I continue to grow in my career. Being and taking advantage of these kind of conferences where you can find the latest, newest, and your other resources of what is changing, and what are the thoughts at the time, and keep on top of that, the best practices, the best type of frameworks, what people are looking at. And then the other one, which comes back to our zero trust and other things, practice good cyber hygiene, right? So we should all be doing that in the first place, right? And zero trust is just one of those areas that I think is hugely important or significantly important And I find that a lot with my clients, even the understanding of zero trust is proportional to what they're exposed to. Not zero trust is a great word, but it means a lot of different things to a lot of different companies. And it doesn't always cover the 4 components of zero trust to truly have a full zero trust framework. And that's the network, that is the end device, that is the traffic in between, and then that's also your end user. If you can secure all those and solve those kind of problems, you create a much stronger, hardened network to protect yourself. So, in summary, for me, it's, what we can do right now, kind of like we're talking about, is keep on top of what's being developed by NIST and what's being developed out in the industry, keeping in touch with your colleagues and experts, and you're taking a look. MSPs need to start talking to their clients now about this coming in the future, because again, as was brought up by Mike, we don't know the exact time frame this is going to happen. This is not linear, as you mentioned earlier. Jumps in progress are made all the time, and there are things that we all know. There's certain technologies that we're aware of that are out there and what's being done, but we also have state actors and our own research that's being done. So we don't know what advances are already out there that are not being mentioned yet. So we could already be, my theory is that we could be further ahead than we even realize right now in this process. Again, so that goes back to, I think the number one priority would be for me is that with having some unknowns, we are still speculating, we have our knowns, and what we don't know, we don't know. The best procedure is to get ahead of the situation, start realizing what you have in your network, start repairing, understanding what needs to be done, and start putting a plan together to get that done. And by all means, secure your network.
I love it. Love it. Thank you so much, Ryan. I think we have a few minutes left here, and I would start with you, Ryan. There's a couple of questions that I've been seeing pop up in the chat sessions. I'll start with Ryan, but it's to the whole panel. This is about, protecting data at the end of the day. Obviously one way to do that is to encrypt the data, whether it's in motion or in transit or at rest, or even in use. But when we move to something new, and the next evolution, if you will, of these encryption algorithms, it's sometimes a little daunting, a little worrying, are there backdoors and things been put in there? And I know that what we do, we focus on being basically crypto agile. And so we sometimes run these things in parallel. So if we got a customer who says, oh, I'm not quite sure I'm ready to go down the, 100% going down PQC route, then, we would run things in parallel. There's a cost to that, to do that, cost and sometimes maybe in a little performance and things like that type of cost. But we understand that we need to sometimes take these steps somewhat slowly and measure it. And other customers are like, hey, I'm going to jump right in. Let's go. As soon as you get ready, let me do it. What are your thoughts around this, Ryan, starting with you? Is it just about, the next evolution of encryption, or should we be looking more holistically at all the different things we can do, including identity management, things like that? What are your thoughts on this?
I think that a holistic approach is always the best approach, because there's parts of every area that we're talking about that overlap, right? So having a holistic approach and looking at all the considerations that you have to have for the different changes that are coming up, the new threats that are coming out, looking at the post-quantum time. And yeah, so that's kind of my opinion. You need to look at everything that we're having to deal with. We have all kinds of regulatory. We're not just dealing with this cyber, area. We have privacy concerns like Katalin was bringing up. You have regulations that you have compliance to all, across the board in different areas, specific to each industry as well, besides regionally, to different, different aspects. For example, if you're financial, you have to run SEC. Just give you a random example. But I think that, taking a holistic approach and getting the discussion and having a team that's honest, looking forward and having future, whether that's your MSSP that you work with, that forms, together with an internal team operations C-suite. There just needs to be a plan to look at all the considerations that you have to remain compliant and protect your data, protect your clients. And I mean, not just the company's clients, and the reputational risk that you have. The forward thinking and being proactive to me, especially when I deal with a cyber breach and seeing the regret that happens and the damage that's done, any effort that you put together and in a prevention of a particular situation happening is much better money spent than the exponentially more cost and damage that can be done by not being proactive. And that's the constant thing that I preach in every conversation. Be proactive, understand what changes are coming, even if they're somewhat ambiguous, understanding and getting a good plan together and a good understanding and having the right experts in your corner can help you put a plan together and keep on top of things and make the right decisions.
Ryan, I think it's totally in agreement with you, but some of the things that has to be said, the current cryptography that we're using has been essentially put together in the 80s, is old stuff, which means it's time to improve it. And I think one of the issues of those new algorithms, they are called post-quantum cryptography, and then creating a lot of fear. They are better, they are faster, which means at the end of the day, do we want to stay with the old stuff forever? Turn out that we think that they are going to be much better against quantum computer, but they are simply better. Which means I think one point we need to get to the fear and then take advantage of what we learn with all of that effort.
Yeah, agreed. Any comments from Michael Kati?
Michael, you're on mute right now.
I'll make one comment to link to the privacy space. So this new Bertrand mentioned it, this new crypto, at least a big chunk of it is based on lattice-based cryptography. So this is a very interesting domain that gives you things such as fully homomorphic encryption. So the ability to actually process data without it ever being decrypted. So it's I would say I think it's fairly exciting in terms of the underpinning technology offers an awful lot of interesting perspectives on where it can go from here in terms of let's say bridging some holes that we may have in how we process data, not just how we store and move it.
Well, I would add one more thing to that, and it's kind of in line. We talked about making those advances. Bertrand talked about just about taking on the stronger cryptography now, or algorithms. In addition, you have a risk. We talk about privacy, PII, etc. There's the high potential and highly likelihood that data is being harvested now to actually be able to breach later. Just because you have a breach and you're exposed, you go through the post-incident response and follow all those protocols and regulations that you have to as far as remediation. That data still is gone. And when you deal with certain parts of PII, they don't expire. You have social security numbers, you have birth dates, you have names and other information that will be just as relevant unless something significant changes that none of us are aware of in the next few years. That'll still be very significant 2, 5, 10, maybe 15 years from now.
Thank you all.
And the last thing I wanted to add to what Ryan was just saying is that things that are not necessarily viewed as PII today may be viewed as PII later, as we are starting to enter into different shared digital spaces for different purposes. Things that you're looking at as generic data, maybe the information that's coming off your private home thermostat, and the temperature data that you're collecting, that may be PII later on when you start looking at carbon footprint. So we need to start looking ahead and really we need to begin looking at what data is and how data is managed and what data fits into different categories. And it's not just that, it doesn't expire. There may be relevant information, that is irrelevant today, which becomes more important tomorrow. So data has a completely different life cycle than a physical asset that has a, that you acquire and has an acquisition cost, and then it has a net present cost as you're moving into the future. Data doesn't fit that same paradigm.
Perfect. Thank you all. Thank you to all the panelists. Thank you for attending, agreeing to attend, going through all the meetings and emails. I really, really appreciate it. And Phelan, with that, I'll turn it over to you.
Well, thank you very much. And thank you for such a lively discussion. I knew it would be engaging, but it was even more engaging than I had imagined. And I love that some of those final comments, Katalin, the things that are not PII today, wow, could they be of importance tomorrow for whatever reason? Like it. Dale's clapping. Richard says, okay, I learned a few things here. What a great panel. Jason says, thanks panel, thanks for your insights. Christopher said that was an awesome panel. Even Damien says, are there reasonable ways to implement PQC algorithms in a future PKI implementation? I suggest we take that offline into the Discord chat or here in the Zoom chat. And Dog says, agreed, great panel. So I'm sure that more accolades will come through as I say this, but thank you to Castle Shield for sponsoring this event and many others. Thank you to Dr. Milton Maddox for being such a great moderator. And thank you to Bertrand, Michael, Katalin, and Ryan for being such great panelists. Big virtual round of applause, and I look forward to seeing you in the audience.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thanks very much. And yes, please keep those comments coming, and I will make sure everyone is in the audience. What food for thought. And yes, of course, there is always going to be the element of when and how and all of that. So really appreciate it.